Have you ever been walking down a street, maybe in a big European city, and seen someone begging and thought to yourself, where do they come from? Sometimes you might notice they seem to be from a particular place, like Romania. And this leads to a question that's both uncomfortable and important. Why do we see so many Romanian people, particularly Roma, begging? Is it a choice? Is it part of their culture? The answers are much more complex and heartbreaking than you might think. Let's get one thing straight right away. Begging is not a cultural trait. It's not something anyone chooses for fun. It's a last resort, a survival mechanism born from desperation. To truly understand this, we need to rewind the clock a bit, back to the fall of communism in Eastern Europe. Imagine a country going through a massive earth-shattering change. In Romania, after 1989, the old system collapsed. State-owned industries shut down, and land was redistributed. For many, this was a chance at a new beginning. But for the Roma people, who had been systematically marginalized for centuries, it was a catastrophe. Many Roma were employed in state-run factories or agricultural collectives. When these disappeared, so did their jobs. They often had no legal claim to the land they had worked on for generations, leaving them jobless and homeless almost overnight. This wasn't just an economic hiccup. It was the latest chapter in a long history of exclusion. For centuries, the Roma people have faced discrimination, persecution, and have been pushed to the fringes of society. This historical baggage meant that when the economic ground shifted, they had no safety net. They lacked access to quality education, couldn't get fair consideration for the few jobs available, and were often denied basic services. When you have no job, no land, and no support, what are you supposed to do? For many, the only option left to feed their families was to enter the shadow economy, or, in the most dire cases, to beg. Then, in the 2000s, another major change happened. Romania joined the European Union. Borders opened up. This seemed like a golden opportunity. For people trapped in deep poverty with no prospects at home, the idea of moving to a wealthier Western European country to find work was a lifeline. So, many packed up what little they had and migrated, dreaming of a better life. But the reality they found was often just as harsh. Imagine arriving in a new country where you don't speak the language. You don't have the formal education or the specific skills that the local job market demands. You might face the same, if not worse, discrimination you were trying to escape. Suddenly, the barriers to finding a legitimate job feel impossibly high. You're in a foreign land, you have a family to feed, and the clock is ticking. In this desperate situation, what's the one way you can immediately try to get some money for food? For many, once again, begging becomes the only visible path. It requires no resume, no language proficiency, no interview. It just requires swallowing your pride and holding out your hand. Now, we need to talk about a darker, more sinister layer to this issue: organized crime. The vulnerability of these individuals and families does not go unnoticed by criminals. It is a sad and horrifying truth that many of the people you see begging are not in control of their own lives or the money they collect. There is significant evidence of organized gangs exploiting this desperation. These gangs operate like a twisted business. They might recruit or even traffic people from poor villages in Romania with false promises of jobs and a better life. Once they get them to a big city in another country, they confiscate their passports, control their lives, and force them to beg. These criminal networks often target the most vulnerable: children, the elderly, or people with disabilities, because they know they evoke more sympathy and therefore bring in more money. Think about that for a moment. The person you see on the street corner might not be begging for themselves. They might be under the watch of a minder parked just around the corner. At the end of the day, every single coin they've collected is handed over to their traffickers. They are trapped in a modern form of slavery, where their only value is how much money they can generate through begging. It's a deeply exploitative system that preys on human misery. So when we see a group of people begging in a coordinated way, it's often a sign that something much more organized and criminal is happening behind the scenes. Beyond the big economic and criminal forces, There are deeply personal, psychological, and social factors at play. At its core, this is about survival. It's about a mother who needs to buy milk for her baby. It's about a father trying to get enough money for a loaf of bread to feed his children. When you're faced with that kind of immediate gut-wrenching need, long-term plans go out the window. Your world shrinks to a single goal: surviving today. When a child grows up in an environment where they see their parents, aunts and uncles begging to survive, it becomes a normalized part of their reality. It's not that it's a desirable life, but it's the only way of life they know. This can create a devastating generational cycle. Without access to education, healthcare, and stable opportunities, the children of today's beggars are at high risk of becoming the beggars of tomorrow. The cycle of poverty and marginalization becomes self-perpetuating. Furthermore, many of the individuals we see on the streets are dealing with immense personal challenges. They might be struggling with a physical disability that prevents them from doing other work. They might have a chronic illness with no access to medical care. They might be grappling with mental health issues, compounded by the trauma and stress of living in extreme poverty. They often lack any kind of social support system, no family or friends they can turn to for help, no government assistance they can rely on. They are truly alone, and begging becomes their final desperate cry for help. So, as we circle back to our original question, it's clear there's no simple answer. The image of a Romanian person begging on a European street is the end result of a long and complicated story. It is a story of historical exclusion and economic collapse that pushed the Roma to the very margins of society. It's a story of migration, where the dream of a better life crashed against the hard reality of language barriers and discrimination. It's a story of criminal exploitation, where the most vulnerable are trapped and forced into a life of begging by ruthless gangs. And it's a deeply personal story of desperation, survival, and the heartbreaking cycle of poverty. Understanding this doesn't mean we have an easy solution, but it does change how we see the person, not just the act of begging. It challenges us to look past the stereotypes and see the complex human reality behind it. It's a reminder that systemic problems require systemic solutions, addressing poverty, fighting discrimination, improving access to education, and cracking down on human trafficking. This is a human rights issue, and it calls for compassion, understanding, and a commitment to creating a world where no one is left with begging as their only option for survival. Thank you for watching and for taking the time to understand this complex issue. If you found this video informative, please consider liking and subscribing for more deep dives into the stories that shape our world.